over Basel 2? What are the key areas that are getting addressed by Basel 3 based on the experiences post the implementation of Basel 2 across the various banks globally? So just trying to understand this entire thing, because the objective of any version of the Basel framework, right from Basel 1 right now to Basel 3, the major objective is make the banking system more and more resilient, more and more being able to withstand the pressure, being able to withstand the stress, being able to withstand the extreme outcomes that come up in the sector. Make it more and more stubborn, make it more and more able to face the issues quite comfortably. So the major intention of any banking system or any banking framework of Basel is to strengthen the banking system, to make the banking system more and more withstanding the pressures. So what has made the the Basel Committee for the Banking Supervision, BCBS is the name of the committee, the Basel Committee for Banking Supervision, what has prompted them to alter Basel 2 and move towards the Basel 3 kind of a framework? What were the key drivers? Right? They have kept two major objectives as a part of Basel 3 framework. One, strengthening the capital across the banks globally. The capital positions make more and more stronger. Along with that, strengthen the liquidity position. So these are the two key objectives as far as Basel 3 framework is concerned. Strengthen the capital system as well as strengthen the liquidity position of the banks across the world. So that itself will promote the resilient banking system. And whenever I am using the word banking here, it is applicable to any financial institution which is exposed to a regulatory capital. So all those where the regulatory capital is involved, majorly like the banking system, they all get covered as a part of this framework. Now, why do you think this kind of framework was necessary? What was the reason for the Basel Committee to think in directions of strengthening capital or strengthening the liquidity position? Very recent financial crisis, which started right from early 2008 or probably from late 2007 onward, that had created a lot of issues with respect to items which are not addressed as a part of the Basel framework, like the banks were using very excess amounts of leverage, and because of that turmoil occurring, they are shaken off. So to have a control on it, so they have experienced that some of the banks were using very excessive leverage, some on the balance sheet, whereas some through the various off balance sheet activities, usage of the derivatives and all. It is resulting in the excessive usage of the leverage. Probably they are getting into some kind of operational leases kind of activities where you can create off balance sheet kind of leverage. And so because of these two things, overall it is looking like the usage of the leverage is very high. As long as the economy is good, that mechanism was acting good for the bank. But once the economy started bouncing, even that framework was also bouncing on the behalf of the banks. So because it has observed that the excessive leverage created a lot of problems, so it wanted to address that area. And even the capital base, right, whatever was the definition of the capital, tier 1, tier 2, the total capital base across all the banks was gradually eroding. Not only it's a problem with one or two banks, across the entire banking system it is observed that the capital base was eroding, and whatever the capital that was present, it was of low quality. So that is one more reason it wanted to strengthen the capital base of each of the banks. So that is one of the reasons improvements are coming out from the Basel 3. And the third, the major problem that is seen, okay, let the capital base erode and all that, but overall the liquidity position is insufficient. The reason being, in most of the cases, one bank was acting as a counterparty to the other bank in majority of the transactions. So because of that, what is happening? If this is defaulting, it is resulting that this is also getting impacted because of this default. So this chain effect is getting created, and overall the liquidity in the system is getting more and more insufficient. So even a small shock is impacting the other banks quite drastically, and they are not even able to absorb any kind of losses. That is one more thing that got built up into the economy because of this financial crisis. And the banking system is not really geared up to handle major off balance sheet risks or even derivatives kind of exposures. The proper risk management things do not exist with the banks even today with respect to various derivatives exposures and off balance sheet kind of exposure. So that itself, so even if some kind of big issue comes in terms of derivatives or any off balance sheet kind of activities, that is shaking up the banking system quite heavily. So even from that dimension, some kind of effort has been put as a part of the Basel 3. And there is one more thing is the commercial banks and investment banks. If we look at it from a theoretical perspective, the correlation between these two set of entities should be almost negligible. But what we are seeing is the commercial banks are acting as counterparties for many investment banking activities, are in getting involved with many investment banking activities in some form or the other, which because of the correlation existing between these two things, the systemic risk is building up. The entire the risk is getting piled up in the entire system, which is what is causing the problems to the banking sector. So that area has to be addressed as a part of the Basel 3 framework. We will talk about this pro-cyclical deleveraging aspect in the next couple of slides. And because of this, there is an entire loss of confidence in the entire banking system itself. The depositors, the lenders, wide variety of people started developing that loss of confidence on the entire banking system, especially in areas of solvency and liquidity. So the two key issues that are getting addressed as a part of Basel 3 framework is more to do with solvency and the liquidity aspects of the bank. And even, okay, these are some of the problems that were identified from the recent financial crisis, but what is the consequence of them? It has gone into such a way that it became the responsibility of the taxpayers as well as the entire public sector to inject liquidity into the banking system. So they are injecting capital, they are injecting liquidity into the banking system, which is what is a major concern. And because of that, even the regulators had to come forward, the government had to come forward in terms of allowing a forced mergers between the various banks. Means the taxpayers' money is at risk. So those kind of things have happened, and even more, the equity, the government started injecting equity into the banks. So now if the government takes equity capital or if the government invests in the equity stake of the bank, it looks as if the bank is getting nationalized. That has caused the entire fear in the banking system. Are the private sector banks of the United States, are they getting more and more nationalized? That created a big fear in the entire banking system, and it has even resulted in the liquidity is going down drastically. So that had prompted the Basel committee to primarily look into all these things and come out with a strong, stringent framework that makes the banking system more and more resilient with respect to liquidity and solvency. So it was majorly focusing on strengthening the regulatory capital framework both from the quality as well as the quantity perspective. And that is what we would like to see on what are the various things that the Basel tree is trying to address. We see that on a broader scale, they have worked something with respect to the capital standards, raising the capital standards. Then they also